rush anybody here. Good evening, all. Welcome to Committee of the Whole, Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. We would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Inkatma and the Silk people. Thank you. Adoption of minutes. Unfinished business, nothing. New business. BC Transit to be presented by Danica White. Danica, you're up. I guess you should push that little button in front of there and it should be red now. You should pull that mic up in front of you there. Excellent. Thank you, Danica.
All right. Thanks for having me here tonight. Go to the next slide. I'll be providing a brief overview of BC Transit's partnership model and an update on how Merritt Transit is performing before I talk about the strategic plan that BC Transit is preparing to launch. And I'm here seeking Council's approval for BC Transit to work with City of Merritt staff to finalize the terms of reference and develop the Transit Future Service Plan for Merritt Transit. And this will, if we go ahead with the transit plan, this will likely be the first of several times I'm in front of you talking about transit and in particular this transit strategy. I'm Danica White. I'm the Government Relations Manager for the Thompson-Kootenay region. I'm based out of BC Transit's headquarters in Victoria. I'm traveling around the region a lot, and I've been in Merritt probably once every month or two. So I'm here pretty frequently riding the buses, working with staff, working with Nicola Valley. I am the main point of contact for local government partners for all things sort of transit related, whether it's communications, media, service, and I'm also supported by a team of subject matter experts in the headquarters in Victoria. So BC Transit is a provincial crown agency charged with coordinating the delivery of public transportation across British Columbia, with the exception of those areas that are serviced by TransLink in Metro Vancouver. BC Transit is unique in Canada in terms of its funding model and its province-wide coordination of multiple transit systems. More than 1.8 million British Columbians in over 130 communities across the province have access to BC Transit service. From small towns to large urban centers, BC Transit provides more than 57 million passenger trips in communities across the province every year. With the current partnership model, BC Transit coordinates service delivery by working closely with local governments such as yourselves, local operators such as Nicola Valley Transportation Society, and the provincial government. As you might know, public transit is highly subsidized service. The biggest benefit of the BC Transit model is the funding formula. In terms of funding, we have two main formulas. For conventional or fixed route transit, the province provides over 46% of the operating costs, and local governments are responsible for funding just over half. Local governments also keep 100% of transit revenues, which helps to offset a portion of these operational costs. And the balance is typically made up through local property taxes. On the other side, we have custom transit, and the province provides additional funding for custom transit, or you might know it as handy dart service, due to its higher operating cost per hour, and this is a customized door-to-door service for registered customers with different physical or cognitive abilities. So Merritt Transit provides what we call paratransit service, which is sort of a blend of these two systems and these two costing models. So Merritt has conventional fixed routes as well as what we call on-request service, which is sort of a handy dart or custom light, which allows customers to book a trip in advance and be transported between two locations within the city. And all residents are able to access this service. However, customers with mobility challenges are prioritized. So under the shared services model, BC Transit provides funding, planning, scheduling, marketing, fleet and asset management, operation support, and contract administration services for each system. And the Transit Future Service Plan that I'm talking to you about today will be the guidance document produced as a result of BC Transit's planning work to achieve local objectives. So I sort of highlighted that in red, which is one of the BC Transit roles and responsibilities. Next. So local governments, such as the City of Merritt, have a big role in transit service, as well as some on the maintenance front, such as managing transit infrastructure like bus shelters. Although BC Transit provides the support and expertise in planning and scheduling of transit systems, the local governments determine service priorities. So local governments set service levels, they set fares, holiday schedules, and then BC Transit takes that direction and implements it with the support of our operating companies. We typically subcontract the operations of our transit systems to a third-party operating company who's responsible for the on-the-ground delivery of transit, managing the transit operators or the bus drivers, any collective bargaining negotiations that might be happening, as well as the day-to-day customer service aspect of transit service, such as lost and found or booking these on-request trips. So I'll provide a quick overview of your local service here in Merritt. Transit systems are typically costed and compared by the number of service hours the buses are operating each year. So the system currently provides just over 7,000 service hours per year. So that's 7,000 hours of a bus driving around every year. And that delivers over 52,000 rides in 2022. The transit system provides service every day of the week and on all holidays except for Christmas Day. There's 3 fixed routes at a cost of $2 a ride. That's if you're paying sort of a cash fare. As well as on request or this curb-to-curb service that's available Monday to Fridays. There's also Health Connections trips to Kamloops on Tuesdays and Kelowna on Thursdays. And Health Connections routes are funded entirely by Interior Health and provide accessible transportation options for residents to non-emergency medical appointments in larger centers. And although medical appointments have priority on these trips, everyone is eligible to be booking a trip on these Health Connection trips. So some of these are also really great services that a lot of residents aren't necessarily aware of. And Nicola Valley Transportation Society is a not-for-profit organization that has operated Merritt Transit since it was established in 2007. You probably see them around. They're located right outside the office. They run 4 light-duty vehicles that can accommodate bicycles, wheelchairs, and other mobility aids. And in June, you'll see 2 brand new vehicles arriving in town to replace 2 of the older vehicles that are set for retirement, including the vehicle that was badly damaged in the flood. So the best resource for yourselves or for residents in town to receive transit information is the BC Transit website. There's a separate site for every transit system, and it has information on fares, holiday schedules, maps, and contact information for customers who might need support with things like lost and found or booking a curb-to-curb trip. This is also where customers can sign up to receive email alerts whenever there is a disruption to what is a normally scheduled service, or an opportunity for local public engagement, such as if someone wants to get involved or take a survey for the strategic plan that we're talking about. The website also highlights the video that Merritt Transit recently was involved in for Transit Worker Appreciation Day that's featuring the Honorable Mayor Getz. So if you haven't had a chance to watch the video, it's on YouTube and is being promoted by BC Transit. So this graph shows ridership recovery levels by week of the calendar year. So on the left is January, week 1, it goes all the way to week 53 or to the end of December. For the last 4 years. 2019 is the top year, and this is sort of our pre-pandemic year that we use as our benchmark when we're comparing ridership levels. You can see the immediate drop in ridership in March of 2020 when the pandemic first hit, and a gradual recovery each year across BC. We're averaging about 90% recovery. And the very short sort of bright green line is our data that's come in so far in this year, in 2023. And we're anticipating that most of our larger urban systems especially will be sort of fully recovered later this year if they're not already. Some of our rural systems have been closer to 70 or 80% recovery. And you may notice that I included a slide in the meeting materials that I've since removed from the presentation. It showed a ridership recovery trend for Merritt that didn't quite sit right with me, so I spent the afternoon looking into it. I've dug into some of our other data sources for ridership, and that showed a much more positive, I guess, outlook for ridership recovery in Merritt based on sort of the revenue aspects of ridership. So what I was noticing is that your revenue is about 91% sort of recovered compared to pre-pandemic revenues. And that certainly aligns a lot more with what we're experiencing across the province and was certainly different than the initial data I was presenting the sheet, which was based off of more manual ridership counts that are taken on the bus. So ridership is sometimes a challenge to be recording accurately, and we use several different ways of collecting it depending on the technology in the area and the operating company and how fares are. So transit revenue isn't a perfect reflection of ridership, especially with month-to-month passes, because someone might purchase a monthly pass, but that doesn't necessarily tell you how many times they got on the bus. So transit revenue isn't an ideal reflection of ridership, but neither is manual counts. But certainly looking at the revenue from the 2021 fiscal year and then comparing it to revenue from 2019, they're almost the same. So I feel much more comfortable thinking that ridership in Merritt is better than I had initially put in the presentation, and so I'm look into that a little bit more, but I wasn't quite comfortable enough to be presenting that today. So I'll go back to that last performance slide. So every year, BC Transit puts out an annual performance summary of each of the transit systems, and Merritt Transit performs very well when compared to other systems of a comparable size. And this is the most recent analysis that we have, which is from the 21-22 fiscal year. We should be coming out with the 22-23 analysis relatively soon. But I'd like to draw your attention to the operating cost per service hour, which is much lower than the tier average, largely the result of the dedication from Nicola Valley Transportation Society, which is again a not-for-profit organization. So transit service is being operated at about $77 per service hour for Merritt, whereas the tier average is about $123 per service hour. And I'm anticipating that the upcoming report will show a strong performance in the 2023 fiscal year as well. So that's a little bit about BC Transit as an organization and what your system is like and how it's doing. Can get into a little bit about the Transit Future Service Plan. So the most recent strategic plan that we have for Merritt Transit is a service review that was completed in 2016. We like to revisit strategic plans every 5 to 7 years, so it's certainly the right time to start thinking about a refresh. The Transit Future Service Plan will be developed in collaboration with the City of Merritt and in consideration of the goals and objectives of the local and regional plans, as well as the impact that COVID-19 and the floods have had on transit in the area. It will focus on scenario planning to help direct decision-making over the next 5 years. It'll include an evaluation of the system and route performance and provide some targeted improvements and optimization strategies for service and infrastructure proposals to ensure that existing and future resources are used as efficiently as possible. The plans are developed with resources internal to BC Transit, so there's no incremental costs for the city. This is part of the business that BC Transit does in our partnership model. So the development of the plan will be collaborative with extensive input from partners, including the Nicola Valley Transportation Society and key stakeholders. BC Transit will work with Nicola Valley and city staff to identify who the stakeholders are, finalize the engagement plan, and we'd be targeting engagement potentially in September so that we're making sure we are capturing the student population at the college. Public engagement will aim to reach current and future riders using things like intercept surveys, such as customer satisfaction surveys with riders, pop-up kiosks outside City Hall at the Transit Exchange, as well as open houses and an online survey. And if there is interest, I'd also be happy to support a workshop with council if you wanted to provide input more directly. So council will be engaged again at key milestones throughout the process, which typically takes about a year or so to complete. The results of the public engagement will be reported to council, and your feedback will be used to inform the service priorities that get integrated into the plan. Once the plan is drafted, it will be brought back to council for review and approval. Again, the process is designed to be collaborative so that the final plan is aligned with the goals and priorities of the city. The final plans are made public, and it will be used by BC Transit and city staff over the next several years to guide service changes or additional investment. The strategic plan is non-binding. The City of Merritt retains full authority to manage the implementation schedule of the plan. And in the future, when we're preparing to implement some plan recommendations, such as introducing service to a new neighborhood in the area, BC Transit also requires council approval of each individual investment. That's a bit of an overview of transit and sort of what we're looking to do this year. And again, I'm recommending that council approves BC Transit to work with the City of Merritt staff to finalize the terms of reference and develop the transit future service plan. And I'd be happy to talk to you more or answer any questions about the BC Transit model or how we go about developing this plan.
Thank you, Danica. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you for all your hard work, and thank you for listening to the citizens of the community with the extra routes we got this year. I appreciate that. All it took was a couple of conversations and it was done. So I do appreciate it, and I do know how much the people in the community love this transit system. They really do. And how much the drivers are respected. I see they go out of their way. They help people with their groceries at Walmart. They help put bikes on the racks. They help take them off. So it's a real cohesive work or relationship that people have really come to enjoy. So we're very proud of our transit system, and thank you for bringing this forward to us. Council, any questions? Councilor Petrosi.
Could you speak to the health connection? I didn't realize that there was for taking people to, say, Kelowna or Kamloops for...
Yeah, so the Health Connections runs through Merritt, so it's a service that is provided, that's available to Merritt residents. It is actually delivered out of Kamloops. So it's part of the Kamloops system that they are delivering it, but it comes through Merritt, and it is, again, available to all residents to be getting on the Health Connections bus in Merritt and continuing on to Kelowna or Kamloops.
Okay. And for booking, I guess if you look online to see the way to book or that type of thing?
Yes,
okay.
and for that, when you are calling the office in Kamloops, we're booking that as opposed to the office here. Okay. Because it's a different operator.
Okay,
yeah, it's available to residents, and I believe it's a couple dollars. I think I've got the $5.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
We tried.
Councilor Hogan.
Question to staff. So I would like to get their input about this request when we have an action item in the agenda. So we always get the staff input, and I want to give the opportunity to understand what is their staff position on this.
CEO Smith.
Thank you, through to Councillor Ogan. For this, because we're at the Committee of the Whole here, it would come forward to the next council meeting, and there would be a staff report associated with this at that time. So absolutely, there would be an opportunity for that at the next meeting.
Councillor Etchart.
Well, it's kind of funny to see a recommendation for us to work with the city, because I thought we already kind of were, because we always have these reports annually, typically. But I know just a committee of the whole, because I know we were discussing increasing ridership up to Coldwater and other possibilities in the future. So I would think most of us would be in support of that, but because I know in the past we've had other people from transit come and present to council before in the last term and whatnot, and it's always been good and interesting to see the numbers. And we were discussing different fleet pieces being there, but when you talk about the plan and you were happy with the ridership, were you seeing an increase in communities of the size when you had the 4.4 versus the 6.3? Were you finding that communities of the size merits a little higher ridership or less?
So one of the reasons that I wasn't 100% confident in presenting the ridership graph that is in your deck is because it's based off of, largely based off of manual counts.
Yeah.
And those are the same numbers that are in the annual performance summary that's comparing the 4.3 to the 6 point
whatever it was.
Whatever. So yeah. I feel less comfortable with those comparisons. I do know anecdotally and based on your revenue that ridership for a small community in Merritt is definitely higher than other rural systems.
Similar sized. Yeah.
So I know that it's performing very well. It's very well used.
Yeah.
And I know that there's strong support for it.
And it's nice because since Merritt's so well spread out, to have that option is nice, especially for places like Lord Nicola or if we expand it up to Coldwater. I know that's what the last council was hoping that might be on the wish list. But thank you.
And some of those priorities for expansion will be revisited and reprioritized through this strategic plan.
Great.
And there are opportunities as we move forward every year to be revisiting the investment of some of those priorities with council every year.
Well, that's great. Great news. Thanks.
CEO Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to provide two comments. First, to speak to Councillor Etchart's point. You're right, we do talk with BC Transit all the time, but recognizing the council does have the choice. If you were satisfied with your 2016 plan, you don't feel the need to go through another process, we can run it that way. But we also have seen considerable changes in our community. As well, we have the advantage of a much more recently completed official community plan, which does forecast where we anticipate future growth and other things, where I think putting a lens of transit on that is going to add value, and I'll save you what the conclusion is likely to be when you see our staff report on the next agenda. The other thing that I did want to let you know as well is stemming from the meeting that council had with Cooks Ferry Indian Band. You did say, hey, staff, go and explore the potential option to provide transit service out to Cooks Ferry. We have explored that, and I will say, because I got to make sure I get this wrong, we're not looking at any type of service expansion at that point. If there was any fixed route service, it would largely come probably through this Transit Future Service Plan and a different process. But there might be an opportunity for expanding that door-to-door, for taking the existing hours for our door-to-door service and allow residents out at Antco to tap into that service. And so we're potentially looking at how we might be able to work through modeling that agreement, and that would potentially come back to you for sign off before this Transit Future Service Plan. So Danica has been very helpful in helping us navigate what that process might look like, and we've had a couple meetings and discussions with Cooks Ferry Indian Band on that point. So just to give you a heads up that even though this is a one-year plan, I anticipate that you might see a potential agreement for that particular point coming before that.
Councillor Newman.
Just a question. I know a few of our younger residents in town have brought up the option of having an online app like many of the other communities for transit service, and I was just curious if that's something that has been, I know our route is pretty simple and there's not, buses meeting up with other buses, but it is something that the younger generation is quite comfortable using, so it was just something that was brought to my attention.
Are you, just to clarify, are you thinking about the transit app that shows the bus locations and sort of real-time schedules? So Merritt is up next to have that implemented, and I expect it will be available by the end of the calendar year. So it's coming.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that one.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions? Thank you, Danica. I appreciate you coming to take time, and I'm sure we'll see you again as we move along. And thank you very much for coming, and have a safe trip back home. Thank you very much. All right. 5.2, Committee Terms of Reference Review. Who's taking that? Mr. Lawes.
Thank you, Your Worship. So on this one, you've got the report in your agenda pack written by Ms. Brick, who regrets she is unable to be here tonight. But this isn't the first time that you've had the chance to think about committees, but this is the committee of the whole, where it's a committee where you consider committees. It's a committeeception. Sorry, yeah, this is why I don't pun. So under section 140, I'm going to power through. Under section 142 of the Community Charter, Council has the authority to create committees to consider specific items and to make recommendations back to Council. And so it's the select committees or select adjacent committees, which this report details, and your agenda pack includes the terms of reference. The vast majority of these are optional. The one thing which isn't is under BC's Accessibility Act, we are now required to have an accessibility committee, and the excerpt from the Accessibility Act was again included in your agenda pack. The agenda pack includes a redlined version of the Age Friendly and Accessibility Advisory Committee, so that's a select committee under section 142, with the proposals on how it should be restructured in order to meet the new obligations. So that includes things like the requirements to have a First Nations representative if possible, the requirement to have be configured in such a way to advise on how to remove and prevent barriers to individuals accessing the organization, the obligation to have certain proportions of people either with disabilities or supporting persons with disabilities, etc. We also included in the terms of basically shadow terms of reference for things like the Heritage Committee and the Recreation Committee, which those were the committees which had historically been established by bylaw for reasons that we don't fully understand now, but probably made sense 10, 15 years ago when it was done. And you've repealed those establishing bylaws now. So if you wanted to re-establish those as select committees under section 142, then the equivalent terms of reference to how those bylaws were set out were included in these packs. So I think what we would hope that we would be able to get from Council at this meeting would be a good conversation about what kinds of committees you want to have. If there are any on this list that you are passionately in favour, you believe certainly should exist. If there are any changes to the terms of reference that you would like made to them, if there are any that you firmly believe as a council should not exist and therefore we can just say punt them out to future consideration. And then in particular with the Accessibility Committee, if there are any changes that you would like made to it, noting that changes would need to be compliant with the legislation in order to meet our obligations under the Accessibility Act. So at that point, I'm certainly available for any questions if you have them, but I think we're hoping this will largely be a council thing if you have ideas, or of course, Mr. Smith and I are here to provide you any support in that.
Thank you, Mr. Lawes. So the only committees that we haven't asked to put in the paper are the Heritage and the Recreation at this point.
Sorry, I should have left this on. We haven't yet provided advertisements for membership of any committees because we're looking for your direction and instructions on, say, any changes that might be made, because that could lead to changes on recruitment. But essentially, after you give us the instruction on which committees you want to see exist, we'll be advertising for members.
So that was just for council's knowledge that we're getting ready to push the other ones except the heritage and the recreation out.
Yes, with the caveat that if you wanted to reestablish them,
Yes.
we would then include those as well. Yes.
Questions, council? Any questions on these? Councilor Newman?
Well, not necessarily questions, but if this is the means to have the conversation around each one of these committees, I suspect, did you want to go down the list and see if there's ones that we are in favor or against, or we don't see a need for, I guess is probably a better way to term it. And then obviously there's a few here that under these committees that are not listed that we've previously discussed as well. So I'm just not sure how to proceed with that.
If you were, through your worship to Councillor Newman, if you were concerned about the absence of things like, say, the Finance Committee, for example, the Section 141 committees are established by the Mayor, so we didn't include them in this list. These are just the Section 142 committees, which are optional, available to be established by Council.
Councillor Newman?
Sorry, just on this list, on the ones that are at least in front of us as it stands right now, I am in favor of an economic development committee. I think it's something that is, it's the backbone of our community, driving, working alongside with staff. I see that being a thing. I've gone through the terms of reference that have been submitted here, and I don't necessarily agree with the way they've previously been set out, whether that has to be the way. I see this being a subcommittee, so to speak, of council working alongside with our current economic development staff, kind of bringing things forward to council from that committee. I also think it is a direct line of communication between council and our economic development staff, which I know are very busy, but I do find this, it can be helpful in the communications with council as well, as to what's going on if we don't necessarily see those staff members in between, just because of our schedules. And I do feel the same with the recreation, although not even remotely close on the terms of reference that are submitted here. I don't see it being like a recreation commission, so to speak. I see it again more of an active role of or partial council members and staff, and working to see, keeping things in checks and balances on what's going on in those departments that I think are, again, much like the recreation department and public works, the backbone of our community. There are services that we offer to our residents that I think are very important, especially when it comes to the pool and the arenas, and how those are working. If we don't have representation from this table there with these staff members and organizations that are working it, sometimes I think there's a disconnect. So those are my opinions on those two.
Councillor Egan.
Thank you. I would just I'd like to agree with Councillor Newman that I agree with all of this. I like all the committees. In fact, there's at least 3 that I would like to get involved with already. So that's really all I wanted to say. And do we all want to be letting everybody else know which ones we like to be involved with, or we're just voting on whether or not we want to keep the committee?
It's committee of the whole, so we don't do any voting at all. This is just information session.
Yeah,
right?
well.
So I mean, unless there's somebody, Councillor Sue.
I'm not going to interject on the specifics, but I do think that adding some degree of structure to this is probably going to help. So I think that you should ideally approve a term of reference for each committee, or direct changes to potential terms of reference where you think that is necessary. And then we'll have a resolution that at the end, potentially for anyone that you've approved, that we would advertise for selections within that, or again, if you wanted to do this in a different way, have an open house, or like you can provide direction down that front. The one thing that I will say for when it comes to setting out the terms of reference is that the more specificity you can provide in terms of what the vision for the committee is, the better. Because one of the challenges that staff always has with committees is that if the idea is that the committee is going to tell staff what to do, we report to council, not any individual select committee. And that's, I know, I think I catch the vision for what you're getting at, and it's always tougher to blend it if the main thrust of the committee is not bringing information, doing some work, and then bringing it back to council. If it's kind of like, hey, we want to work actively and pseudo-direct the work of staff, I will say that that's really where I just don't want to see committees go that direction, because it's council that directs staff. You direct staff, not any individual select committee, particularly where there's going to be 7, 8, 9, depending on how you structure the terms of reference, people on these, and it might be that only one of you is a counselor. And so it's really important that we take our direction from you and the committees bring information to you. So within that, if there's a vision or something that you think specifically needs to change, we're totally game. But I think that kind of core structure has to stay true. Otherwise, I just promise things will fall apart.
Councillor Richard.
I could go either way with all these committees. There's a lot on here, but I found that in the last term, the Economic Development Committee actually did meet and had good suggestions regarding where they would put washrooms downtown and what their ideas were, and it was good. But I find, like, for recreation, I think now that we have a communications person kind of promoting events in town, or hopefully promoting more, or whatever the case may be, that would be helpful. I find that people use social media, so a lot of events are promoted that way. Maybe I'm wrong. So maybe the ActDev, but I could see us not having some of them necessarily, because you can have all these committees that, oh, look, it's a pandemic and we're shut down, and you have one meeting which happened March 13th, 2020, and never met the youth committee again because the students changed and there was a pandemic. And so I think that sometimes we can get committee overwhelmed with too many of them, but I think ActDev I could see staying. But if we asked any of the others, I wouldn't necessarily mind, but I'm one person, and that's just my thoughts.
Councillor Rogan.
Yep, I feel like at some point there was a need to create these committees, but we also know that in the past they stopped meeting. Perhaps the item was completed and there was no need for them to meet again. So there are again some committees that I feel like we may not need, and there is a flexibility to bring them back if something arises. But at this point, I would like to spend our time with all these committees. If we can agree to those committees, then we can just move forward to the terms of reference, because I feel like I review some of the terms of reference and I will have some suggestions, but I would like to express my recommendations to those committees that we are going to move forward.
Thank you. So for myself, I think it's a little silly that we pull the 3 out and then talk about putting some of them back in again. I'm not really sure why we pulled them out, but anyway, let's talk about these committees and which ones we would like to see. I'm someone who agrees that committees do have their place and they have their advantages, and sometimes they have their disadvantages. It's just the way it goes. Some last the whole term, some die on the vine. It's just the way it goes. I think the ones that we have in front of us, other than the 3 that we pulled the bylaw out of, are all very viable, and I would love to see them all go. Terms of reference, I would love to. So for myself, I like the committees we have. If there's something that someone here feels we're missing, then maybe we should have a look at terms of reference, because, let's just start from the beginning. Very first one is the age-friendly and accessibility. We have to have that no matter what goes on. So we're already cool with that one. So let's, Councillor Newman.
If that is the case, and obviously we just have to accept or send the terms of reference correct back to council for approval. If that's so maybe we should review just the terms of reference and make sure we're all in agreement with
That's
that.
what I was going to say, on to the terms of reference then for the age-friendly. So let's just go down the list. So let's look at the terms for the age-friendly. What stands out for anyone that has a problem with what's there?
I would like to make one recommended change, and this is, we have down here at least one member who is of First Nations heritage. The Act requires it to be of Indigenous heritage, and I just want to make it really clear that we're not trying to marginalize Métis or others in this process. So just making that change from First Nations to Indigenous heritage for the final version.
Yep, no, I agree.
And just a question of staff for clarity on those terms of reference, the ones that are red are the ones that...
So this is a change from the past structure. So red is new to accompany, it's primarily to meet the requirements of the Accessibility Act that is also the next, I think, excerpt in your agenda package. Okay. So the red is added to make sure that the committee would be compliant with that legislation.
Perfect, and then the black was everything that was there previously.
That's correct.
Excellent, thank you. I just wanted for clarification.
And I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe this is one of the more successful committees that were out there.
Worked very well. Okay. Yeah.
And this one will go out to the community as well, just like all of them will. So, Councilor Rubin.
So reviewing that terms of reference, so I was just wondering if there is a need to specify a little bit about resources and budget, as well as the terms of reference review. So sometimes I have seen terms of reference that I can see when that one was last updated at the bottom of the page. So I don't know when that happened and how often that can be done. So I think that would be beneficial to specify, how often it's going to be reviewed, and as well as if I'm going to be part of any of the selected committees, I want to see if there is a budget for the specific areas without, getting go back and get any type of approval.
Yeah, hit it on. You can do it as easy as I can.
Thanks, through to Councillor Ogren. So a select committee under Section 142, it's there to inquire into any matter and report its findings and opinion to council. So in all events, what these select committees will be doing is coming up with, say, ideas, recommendations, and we'll be sending them back to council. And then if council choose to instruct action to be taken, then that's the time when, say, resource allocation would need to be done based on, say, the recommendation that council would then voting on and approving.
Okay, that answers my first question. Regarding my second question regarding the terms of reference review, how would that go?
In general, terms of reference review is the first thing that a committee does once established. And so one of the major kind of things on a committee is, does this terms of reference make sense? And so usually each time you reconstitute the committee is when you end up doing that. But I think your point is very well taken that for all of these, we need to have a tracker and then versioning history so that you can understand what those potential changes are. If you want to see a different structure than that, that's completely okay, because it has been fairly ad hoc based on, all right, if one committee didn't meet in a long time, then it might be that terms of reference hasn't been reviewed in 8 years, whereas some of these might have been reviewed as soon as 3 years ago. But I think that it's important that you know that with that versioning history. So that's certainly something that we can implement on terms of reference moving forward.
So that, like you say, that's the first thing that happens at the first meeting is the terms of reference are handed out and everybody goes over them.
Yeah, I think that there is a downfall to that, and I'll flag it, is that most of the time nobody knows what they're doing at the first meeting. And so I think that it would be very good practice to still do it at the first meeting to review what is in and out of bounds, but probably one of the last touches on a committee should be, okay, what worked, what didn't within this, and probably amending terms of reference towards the end of a council term or periodically throughout the term is probably still a good idea.
Councilor Richard.
Well, the age-friendly committee was successful, and it was really helpful because it came at a time where we had just had a loss of a senior over by the post office from injury due to inaccessibility. And there was action taken by having that flashing light at the post office and some others in town. So this one is a particularly successful committee, and they, suggestions coming forth about how to spend the money, and then us finding the money, or, fun events that we get to do at budget. How exciting. But I think it would be great and always improving. So I really, once we have them up and running, they can keep changing. That's probably the most successful one. And from my earlier comment, I wasn't saying that I don't agree with all of these committees. It's just some of them, if we didn't have them, it might not be so bad to start out small and expand to more too. Because they're all great committees, but, if people are just getting used to being on committees and making them work well, might not be a bad idea. Thanks.
CEO Smith.
The other thing that I wanted to highlight for you is we're still doing a little bit of work to gather information. You'll notice that one of the big additions in here is that they'll consult in the development of an accessibility action plan, whereas we already have our age-friendly action plan, which actually is one of our better strategic plans. If you guys have been through it, there's a lot of good concrete recommendations in there, many of which have been worked through, some of which still need to happen. And so we suspect there isn't a crystal clear ball on this, but we think that our age-friendly action plan is probably sufficient to meet the requirements of the accessibility action plan, but it might just require an update to our plan or something like that in order to make sure we get there. So know that when we're saying to review the results of the accessibility action plan and this plan, it might end up being that it's one plan, but we still have to make sure that when those requirements come out for what has to be in that plan, that our plan has all of those things. Does that make sense? So it looks like we're talking about two plans, but I just want to be clear that we're very likely just talking about one plan that might need to be tuned up a little bit.
And just a question of that plan, I did read it a while ago, but was that an in-house done report, or was that something that was we sent out to like RFP?
That one was one of our more successful hybrids, where it was led by a consultant, but we had a lot of great community engagement input, lots of that with that one, but that was a consultant-led.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, age-friendly, are we happy with the... Councilor Newman, you're back.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, so if the goal is at the first committee meeting that we would, I guess, take the terms of reference and meld that out with whoever committee members, is it just fair to say that we can, do you need a recommendation to send these terms of reference to an established committee, or what's the best recommendation from staff to go forward on this one?
Where there is not currently compliant terms, because those terms need to be amended, I think for this particular one, it would make the most sense for you to recommend to council that the terms of reference be adopted as amended, because I do want to see that Indigenous change. That would be most appropriate for this, and that way you would take it up for adoption of these terms of reference at the next meeting. It would still be the case that the next group is still going to, I think, give it the deep dive, but we need to have the compliant one in order to bring it out. So that's how I would recommend that.
And I will make... Sorry, I'll make a motion that we send these, the terms of reference forward to council as amended here, along with the committee structure.
Do you want to wait till we go through them all?
Well, I think we should do it one at a time, because if we, and I'll just complete that, because if we do them one at a time and one of them doesn't go forward, we may have to vote on all of it.
Seconder, Mr. Petrosi. Any other comments? All in favor? Opposed? None. Okay, good. One out of the way. Airport advisory. I'm just letting everybody have a look and see what the terms are and see if there's anything that comes up. Councilor Newman?
No, and again, much like the last one, I think we talked about this at the council meeting last week. And yeah, I think everything seems clear here, and there's nothing that I'm necessarily opposed to. It would just be getting this one out to the public to see if there's any additional interest.
And that is exactly what's going to happen.
Just wanted to say, when you're doing these ones here, where if you're not making a resolution on that one, we probably don't need to bring it to council. You can just have a blanket resolution at the end that we go to publish. One thing that I will note that really is important here, if you're not 100% sure on the terms, the one thing I want you to be sure on is the composition, because that might change how we approach this. So if you think the numbers aren't right, change that now, but everything else is probably can be changed in the future after recommendations from the committees.
Councilor Newman?
So just back then on the airport committee, because it says 5 to 7 voting members comprised of one council member appointed by the mayor, which could obviously include the mayor. I'm just not sure if council has any appetite to have a second member of council sitting on that committee. So then therefore we would have to amend that at this point in time.
What's the flavor? Do we want to see 2 councillors on that, or we just want 1? What do we want? And just so you know, I'm de facto, so I sit on every one of these things. So,
can I get your interpretation take? I think that if there was a second member, they might just fall under the members at large with an interest in advancing the airport and surrounding. Not saying that you could explicitly set out 2 or 1 to 2 if you wanted as well, but I think that it wouldn't be inappropriate if there were 2 people that had a passion for the airport to just say, hey, they're coming on as a member at large, potentially, but if you wanted it to be a guaranteed sure thing that there's 2 councillors on there, do exactly what you're doing.
But then wouldn't that take somebody's seat away?
Well, I think you're taking the seat away either way. You're just deciding whether you're doing it after considering all the applications or you're doing it by virtue of how you've structured the committee.
Right, and that's why I brought that up, was whether if we had a discussion about the possibility of who would be sitting on this committee, if that was the flavor that we may need to amend the 5 to 7 voting members, if it was to have 2 councils or council representations.
I'll be honest with you, I'll be assigning someone to this as well. So there will be an actual assigned councillor. And then I will sit on it as well.
So then should we amend it to 5 to 8 voting members if there's going to be 2 people from this table sitting there?
We'll pretty much,
If they want it to be an even number.
we'll pretty much have to do that for all of them because, again, I de facto sit on every one. Now, I guess that might, am I a voting member? I guess. So hold on a second.
Well, you would be a voting
Yes, I
member,
would.
like on a committee for sure. It's just, however, I don't know. I mean, I'd rather have it done right the first time versus having to come back to all of a sudden we have an extra person and we have to send somebody home because we have 2 council members sitting there.
We're having a debate on delegation of authority, because technically speaking, you guys have heard it probably a million times by now. Standing committees are appointed by the mayor, select committees are appointed by council. You make appointments by council. Here we've got it where it's a select committee where we're saying 1 member of council appointed by the mayor. Is that the council delegating authority to the mayor to appoint a member of council, or is that an improper term as it's structured? I would say it's probably not going to damn anything either way, and we'll do a little bit of research on that when this comes forward at the first committee meeting.
So other than that little point, we're happy with what the terms look like for the airport?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we satisfied that we'll get the information back, or we don't need to make a motion on that, do we? Okay, good. Moving on.
We're just making a note of all the committees that you're asking us to advertise for, and we'll do a blanket resolution at the end.
Economic Development Committee. I think we kind of already touched on this. I think it's a committee that everybody agrees we should have. I'll tell you right now, it'll be one of your most volatile. It always is. Councilor Newman.
Did we want to decide, so does that mean then the environmental select committee that was listed before that, we're not going ahead with that?
Did I miss it? Sorry, maybe I missed it. Oh, sorry, I missed it. My page stuck together. We'll back up 1. We'll go to Environmental Select Committee. Sorry, let's back up. So, My pages stick together. So Environment Select Committee. What do we see there? Again, I think with everything that's happened with us in the last 2 years, I think this is important. I think it's important to have, I think we'd be a little lost without having this. So, I guess that's my view. I don't know what your view around the table is. I'm all for it.
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing that I'll say, and whether you guys want it now or you want it in a report, but I think that Councillor Olin at a previous meeting had said, hey, I want to understand how some of these committees functioned previously before making these decisions, to have a bit of an understanding there. This is a committee that I think it might make sense to change the structure. I think having a group where you can refer things to that committee to review, like again, one of the main things in this is to review and provide input on existing bylaws, programs, things like that. The challenge is that if they meet somewhat regularly, there's lots of times where there isn't things to talk about that are ultimately going to help advance your the council's goals. And so I think that let's take, if we were to ever move towards like a water metering implementation program, could that be a particular thing that's ultimately assigned to a committee like this to provide recommendations in relation to environment and things like that? I think that it might be a good way to go about it. But I do get a little bit worried with this one because it's quite technical in nature, that if there isn't a specific item that's being reviewed and seeking recommendations on, there were very, very few recommendations that came from the Environment Select Committee when it last ran. And there was a lot of good discussion and conversation, but not necessarily things that helped. I'm trying to be careful with how I use my words. Not necessarily things that led to a resolution or a recommendation to council. So that is one thing that we found with this, quite technical in nature. If you're looking for specific feedback, very valuable. If you're outside of that, I just don't know if they would need to meet as regularly as what's stipulated here.
Okay. Councillor Newman?
I just had a question in regards to the Director of Engineering and Development or their delegate. When it comes, and like you're saying, this is a very technical committee, I would assume that it would be more along the lines of the Director of Public Works that would probably be working hand in hand, especially when it comes to water metering implementation and those kind of things. Not necessarily, I don't see it being a development services, but that could be just me.
There's a lot of different things. I think this is probably one of your weakest terms of reference. If you guys do want to set up this committee, I'd highly recommend changing it. First thing you'll note is that it's purporting to be a select committee, but if you look at the composition, it's half members of the public, half members of council. It's really trying to be a standing committee, which I don't think this lends well to a standing committee structure. So you'd be looking for something different from a structure perspective. I think it was just a bit misguided, and I'm not pointing fingers or anything at the last one. In terms of who is there in the advisory capacity, I think that it's probably two different staffers, if you want to know the truth. I think that there is an element of the kind of planning and development services that is a lens that helps with this. I think there is an element of the public works and engineering side as the ones that are primarily the arbiters of the water sewer systems, other things that are very often going to be looked at and consulted by this committee. So it's probably two different bodies instead of one if you wanted to do it right. But I'll say that if there's a desire to do something in the lens of environment, I would recommend probably not adopting this in its wholesale form and providing some things that you want to see, and we would bring something different back. Because I just don't think it needs to meet this much. The structure is wrong as standing, and you're probably right that the advisory positions could use some touch-ups.
Councilor Richard?
This one is an interesting topic because probably when it was named environment was probably in the 90s when recycling was just starting to get into people's minds, paper and tin cans. But, you know, we're really looking at building codes now, like the step code going to 2030. Homes are having to become more efficient. We're seeing electric charging stations for vehicles. We're being encouraged to use our bicycles more, walk more, have the active transportation plan. So I think as a society, we're going that way. It might be more accurate to call it the Climate Action Committee or something more current than calling it environment, because it's our environment, but it's also climate awareness and adaptation than it is environment. It is our current world. And I think whether we like it or not, we would be involved with that. So maybe this requires a bit more thought. It's really interesting because I think it comes down to development and planning, because we really need to encourage, you know, the availability of charging stations, where we have some here at the city, at the Petrocan, different places in town, the Tesla stations up at Canadian Tire, I think. Isn't that? Or no, that's the motel. That's the hotel. Sorry, those
Charging
are.
stations at Canadian Tire too.
Yeah,
And there's charging stations at the.
we're seeing more of it. So it's really becoming more and more visible in the community. So I think it would be more appropriate to call it something more than just environment, because it's kind of
Environmental impact.
yeah, just something a little bit altered. So,
The other thing I was thinking too is that.
Hold on, Councilor.
Sorry.
Are you done?
but yeah, I would be interested because there's so many technical pieces regarding building, but it's also environment because you may have to ask Public Works. It is really technical though, and it seems kind of like something that doesn't impact on some levels, but it impacts everybody. So anyway.
Just to also be a little bit of history, one of the reasons we went with this years ago is because we were on the wood stove swap program, and we had to have a committee involved with that. Dave Baker ran that, and I think that's where this was born, was for that reason alone, for the wood swap program, or wood stove swap program. Councilor Regan?
What I was thinking is that, you know, you said 2, probably 3 staffers that I can think of at least, because you'd have to be involved with whoever you're doing the applications for grants.
Yeah.
Because you can't just say, well, we've got to do this, got to do this. You've got to keep the budget in mind. And as far as the composition of the people of the general public, can't just be any Joe Blow. They've got to have some background in order to make a contribution.
That's why you go over the applications when they come in.
Yeah, okay.
I think what you guys are saying is all spot on, and you don't have to take it. You could set it up as committee, and we're not going to lose sleep over this at all. But this thing is really lending to a project-based task force. If there's something that needs a public lens, you want to do a zero-scaping incentive plan. How are we going to roll that out? We want to encourage reduced water use. What's this going to look like in the community? Because other than that, like a lot of what you're saying there, we do our development review planning and things like that, but how is this committee going to interact with that? I think it would actually maybe introduce more hurdles, potentially slow things down, and I don't know if that's the goal. So if you have a clear vision of what you want, go for it. Otherwise, I really do think that if there's a project or a plan that you're wanting to implement that has an environmental focus, strike up a select committee that has a short-term duration with a specific plan, and it'll break down as soon as that project or plan
Turn it
is
into
done.
a steering committee.
Yeah, it would still probably function as a select committee, like under the legislation, but it just wouldn't be one that is planning to be around forever. You'd be striking it up for a particular purpose, and it would be within the terms of reference. It would fold after that thing is done.
Councilor Hogan?
Yeah, it seems to me that we are in agreement of keeping this committee. We just want to make sure that the structure that we decide or we go for is going to work. Would that be appropriate to request staff to come up with a proposal based on best practices of other municipalities to set up this committee?
Love it.
So we redline this with more information? Sure. I'm all for that.
Does that need to be in the form of a motion?
Yep. Is that the motion you're making, Councilor Hogan?
Second.
Seconder? Any other questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now, we will go to Economic Development Committee terms and reference. like I say, important, but sometimes can get bogged down. And anybody have any this one might take a while.
It's very important committee for me.
Oh,
it's one of the most important committees. So as I had already expressed in the past, so when we want to promote our city, we want to understand what we can offer investors, what we are gonna be working on, different initiatives, who is doing what. I was part of this committee a few years ago, and I believe that. There should be, there is always a need, for these people to meet and work on and make the best decisions for the city. So I would like to keep it.
Councillor Newman.
I 150% agree with Councillor Olgren on this one. It is something that I see a need for. I'm looking at the non-voting advisory and support capacity. I see that being listed there. I'm not sure even why that is needed necessarily, because I see it more, again, I like the idea of having up to 3 members of council, owners that serve the public, I see that, but I would include the people who are listed here as non-voting as possible voting members. I don't see, and maybe not all of the people that are listed here, but I just see that if they are members of this committee and they are who they are in our committee, I see their votes as being very important, to say the least.
I'm not really sure the committee clerk should have a vote, to be honest with you, or either of the TNRD directors. I'm not sure why that would be. So, but anyway, I guess that's something to consider, council to consider that. Councillor Newman.
Oh, and that's what I was saying, like, I don't necessarily 100% agree with all the people that are listed under that, but I would say that those that may be included on the committee would be voting members. I could see there being a committee clerk there for note-taking purposes, only because, 100%, these are usually high-flying ideas that come out of this committee, and I don't even necessarily see the purpose of either the electoral area M or N being part of this, but that's my own opinion.
CEO Smith?
Yeah, I can share a little bit as to the reasoning for why that was made. So first off, best practice is to never have staff voting at any committee. You guys or whoever, the community members, are going to be the voters. So I would highly recommend not to have staff voting, but any of the other 4 could be voters. I think that how I would probably distinguish it is if they're there because that organization is telling them to be there, I think that the non-voting advisory is good. But if you had somebody from within CF or the chamber that actually applied to be on that committee, they wouldn't be precluded, and I think they could be a voting member. And if they wanted to bring in another person as well as an advisory, they totally could. I think that it's making sure that that lens is captured. I think that if you were to redo this right now, I would probably also include a representative from Merritt and Nicola Valley Destination Marketing Society as the non-voting advisory and support capacity. Because I think one of the big things with this is even if the terms of preference don't change, what this committee has to be is what those other organizations aren't. So we don't want to be doing the work of CF because there's already an established box there, and this committee can't be that. It can't be the chamber, and it can't be the Nicola Valley Destination Marketing Society. So figuring out what it is going to be part of the function of the committee, I think, but having those other groups there to make sure that we're not tripping over each other, I think is probably of utmost importance to make sure that this is going to be successful.
Councillor Richard.
I don't really want to get tied up in the weeds of an economic development committee, because the bottom line is they're going to have discussions and ideas and talk with others and suggest stuff to us, and we're going to make decisions and have to find budget anyway. We didn't fund the toilets downtown, and it was maybe a good idea, but it didn't happen, and we're going to still make that decision anyway, so no sense getting all worked up about what they're gonna do or not gonna do, because first off, we have to approve their decisions anyway, so just keep that in mind.
It's a good idea, but
CEO Smith.
I just want to put one caveat on that one of those suggested locations did get built into a grant application for the West Merritt Active Transportation Path, which we did get. So one of those bathrooms through a backdoor approach did fall in the plan. It wasn't the bathroom that everybody was talking about at Spirit Square, but there was a Portland loo that was built into that, largely stemming from the recommendation of that committee. So I don't want to minimize, there was a tangible action that led to something in a grant application that is going to lead to the development of something.
Councilor Rogan?
Just throwing it out.
Maybe not. I just want to add that based on my experience when I was part of this committee, when we were talking about different projects, initiatives, sometimes we had to get a consultation from First Nations, and that delayed the process. So because we have to go in and approach them. So I think that maybe for the composition would be beneficial to include a First Nations representative, obviously with the expertise in the economic development area, that would speed up the recommendations here.
Is that your recommendation?
I'm just bringing that up.
Do I have a seconder on that recommendation? Oh, hold on. Councilor,
I just got a question on that. I really like this idea. This one has legs because I think it's going to make things easier for you, as well as meeting council's goals of reconciliation. My question is it's always who is it, right? And so either we invite the economic development officer or representative from each band to be there, and that would probably be an option, or we try to find a home like somebody from maybe the tribal council or something like that, where there's a person there that maybe has the ability to have a lens of all of them. I think that I will say that as staff, this is a really good idea. I think that we should probably have a conversation to figure out who should be on it, who wants to be on it, because if there is a desire to make this bigger, council might want to entertain it.
Would a representative from NVIT cover, because that is all five bands are involved with that, and they are some of the youth up there are very active, and John and Ken pretty much, when I need to get a question answered regarding the five bands, they give me the answer because they have the authority to do that. So I'm just wondering if an NVIT...
I think it's worth exploring, absolutely. I think the question is, do they have that authority in relation to kind of the educational component, or do they have it for the economic development? Is this somebody from SPIAM, which is, again, an organization? So I just think there's lots of permutations that it could be that we might not be prepared to answer yet, but I do think that this is something that is missing from the current composition.
Councilor Egan?
I just wanted to add that if you're going to be adding an Indigenous person to this committee, we'd probably be adding them to all committees. We want to achieve our reconciliation mandates. Just a thought.
Councilor Newman?
I agree with both actually comments there. However, I'm just wondering though if it needs to be, like for this committee itself, if possibly it might not be a voting member in this situation, or maybe it could be. I think it lends to maybe this is something that really needs to be reviewed again prior to making the committee, only because I think there's different options in how Mr. Smith was saying that we could have them as one band, or we could have 5 band representations, or we could have somebody from, like the mayor was saying, from the school. So I think it all depends what we try to accomplish with this committee, but if, I really think that needs to be hashed out, but I just don't know what the best way to do that is. But
I do agree with some of the things, but I mean, this is a committee that's focused on the growth of the city in its boundaries. I guess the other question would be is, do we have any information on what other communities have done with the reconciliation as committees are being formed? Have we had any of that?
There is a really broad range of things that have been done. So there are some communities that have set up as you guys talked about, I think in the very first go around with this, like a more focused reconciliation committee. It's not always called a reconciliation committee, but where almost every project goes through that committee to apply a lens on it. So if council is wanting to do a waterfront downtown development, they're going to refer that to this particular committee to get a lens on it. If you're wanting to pass a bylaw of some significance, it goes to this committee. So that's one potential model. I think that there is a growing trend towards mandating or including Indigenous representation on committees. I think that there's a potentially softer touch that if you wanted to encourage this, you may not be requiring an Indigenous person, but that we could include some type of language on trying to ensure that committees are diverse, and much like you do with hiring practices, right? Where, hey, all things held equal, we're going to try to make sure that there's Indigenous representation on the committee.
Now, these committees are all open to the public.
Yeah.
And they can then pull in a purview from someone that is attending, First Nations or not. We've had this happen before. So, I mean, in a way, you will get who wants to be there and who doesn't want to be there.
It's true, but the members of the public, there's generally no right of speech, whereas in a non-advisory voting, in an advisory non-voting capacity, you are there to guide the committee in their decisions. And so ultimately, if you had representation from the bands saying, hey, we just want to let you know that we've actually got this particular project happening on, there might be a partnership with that. I think that it's one step further than just saying you're there as a member of the public.
Councilor Rogan?
Yeah, I just want to add that there was more than one instance where we were working on a specific project, and there was a specific event. We were networking, and we realized that the economic development for Coldwater Band or for the Lower Nickel Indian Band, they were working in similar projects that if we had worked together, it would have been beneficial for both.
And that's why we're trying to get an MOE, right? So we can all work together. So I guess we have a question on this one, whether we want to move ahead with it as it is now, or do we want to have representation? Councillor Petrosi.
Well, I do agree with Councillor Egan that I think we do need First Nations, somebody representing on each committee. But when we put it out there, we may not have that person on that committee, like we may not get First Nations wanting to be involved.
No, that's true.
You know, so
you could be. There's some of these committees may not get anybody.
right, right.
So it's possible.
But to have all committees with representation, I think that would definitely be important.
Councilor Newman.
Can we set it up so that it is like, I'm not sure the breakdown, like I keep going back to this, in a non-voting advisory support and capacity, if that, keeping it there and then listing who that member might be, or a band in as a whole being listed there might be one way, but I also, if we include somebody as a voting member, they have to be in attendance then, and then, or do the rules of quorum still follow on these committees where things are set up? And that's something that could be a concern going forward. So I just want to know how that.
You've hit it on the head. Generally, you're wanting, this isn't, a soft invite. That could be somebody who is a non-voting advisory member. If they're only able to make half the meetings, no sweat, right? But if you have that too much in the committee as a whole, you're going to have a lot of times you don't make a quorum, and that doesn't work well. I would suggest that if the concern is primarily on the non-voting side, don't worry about, and like we can advance, we can put out the post and then work through who should and shouldn't be at the table once the committee is structured. You don't probably have to have that figured out now. If the voting side feels wrong to you and you want specific Indigenous representation on the voting side, then I think that should be something that you do now, because again, that might change how the call goes out. The other thing that I will say, and this is actually speaking to a relationship between Kamloops and Tecumloops, which I was at a conference here recently where they were presenting because they won awards for their kind of reconciliation and reparation of relationships. One of the challenges that we have that's a bit different is that for Kamloops, reconciliation primarily means working with a band with a single point of view, and they send representation and you're good. And so for us, if we were to say Indigenous representation, it's really hard, and in some ways it's actually super colonial to say represent all Indigenous people when it's like, but I'm part of Upper Nicolet Band. That's how I view the world, right? And that does not mean, and I'm not in any way trying to diminish that experience, but I think that it is hard where that might bring a particular perspective, and it does just get a bit more complicated depending on the committee and how you want to do this.
Mr. Lopes.
Thanks, Your Worship. One thing which does spring to mind is at the moment, our application form that we ask people to fill in, it doesn't, basically it's a very simple form which asks people which committee are you interested and why. We could potentially include on that an option to ask people, do you self-identify as Indigenous, as belonging to various minority groups, etc., which we don't currently do. And then that would provide you with additional information when you were considering which members you wanted to appoint to committees. It would, so, for example, there could be someone who is of Indigenous heritage and identifies with a culture, but didn't feel that was important to write in the box we currently give them. And so you wouldn't necessarily know that when considering them as it currently stands. Whereas you would then say, if we redesign the form, you could learn that information about them and decide whether or not you wanted to take that into account.
Thank you. Councillor Egan?
Thank you. Just for clarification, in a non-voting advisory and support capacity would mean that they would be invited should their advice be necessary for however the meeting might play out that evening. So if we were making an economic development initiative in a certain area, if there were certain bands that would have immediate concerns about that or want to have input, we could invite those particular bands?
Yeah, it would probably get structured. If this is the direction you go, they're probably all non-voting advisory. They're all welcome to come to any of the meetings and encouraged to do so. And part of it is questions. Oftentimes it does work out that you wouldn't know who's voting and non-voting very often until the vote actually happens, and some people just don't vote. And so they're treated, their voice matters. It's part of the debate and discussion. That's not true in every community, just so you know. There are lots of places where you are there to ask questions and you don't do otherwise. I think that less formality is probably healthier, but that's my view. I do think that you guys are on to something. I've heard it from almost everybody here. I just think that you're going to be okay taking that up as a committee and not solving this one now, because I think it might take a little bit of time to figure out who should be there and how it gets structured for who's providing advice. But I don't know that you need to hold up a committee if it's one that you feel it needs to go.
Councillor Newman.
And I guess there's also the opportunity in the fact that we will be publishing this request going out to the public to say who is interested in sitting on this committee, and it very might become obvious to us in the responses that, okay, yep, no, it's clear. We have these people that are interested from a certain area or neighborhood or whatever that might be that are very interested in sitting on this committee. So, I mean, I guess at the same time, it's no harm in going ahead with how it is and then seeing who the applications are that come forward at that given time.
I agree, and I do like Mr. Laus's self-identify checkbox. I think it's a good idea. I think that's something that has been missing. So Do we need to recommend on that, or? I would like to see that box added to all the committees.
That one, we can just change the form, your worship.
Sure, I think we'll make a motion on that one. I'll make the motion that we add the identification box. I need a seconder.
Second for discussion.
Sure, go ahead.
Just curious, does that infringe on anything? I'm just curious, sometimes you can't ask age, sex, discrimination of any sort on any kind of application, so I just want to be sure that that would be something that is completely okay before we go ahead and do that.
Well, the box is optional to check, is it not? So I think that's open to everybody and anything, not just First Nations.
I think the risk is what you do with the information. And so if, again, it's not uncommon for employers, for example, to have policies that specifically state that they have a diversity mandate or whatever the case is. And when you hire in accordance with that mandate, it's not in breach of any of those. I think that you are raising a question that's fair, and I've got a pretty good idea of what the answer is. I don't think it's going to cause any issues, but I think that that's worth looking into before we plop it on the page.
We also have a part on the form where we ask them what their interests and background are as well, do we not? That's kind of the same thing to a certain degree.
Yes, I don't have it on the screen, so I'll just read it out. The current one asks for name, address, phone, email, tell us about yourself, blank box. I think it can make a difference because blank box. The committees I'm interested in serving on are blank box. I'm available for meetings, daytime stroke, evening.
Okay. So we do have a motion on the floor on that. Any other communications or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Heritage Advisory Committee, terms of reference. Now, before we get going, a little bit of history on the Heritage Committee. This Heritage Committee was formed years ago, and it was to put to find out the heritage buildings that we had in town and put those plaques on them. And once that was done, it kind of just petered out. They were starting to look at reclaiming some old buses from the city of Vancouver that were here and restoring them, and it started to move in that direction, but then the committee just kind of died on the vine. So I'm not really sure how this one would fly, if there would be any interest. I haven't heard nobody. I mean, I'm sure all of us have been approached, like, when are you going to do this committee? I've never heard anybody ask about this one. I really haven't. So and I don't want to sway your minds, I really don't, but I'm not really sure this is. Councillor Etchert.
I think that the Heritage Committee in theory is a great idea, but I've seen it be a problem for anyone who's trying to do any improvements to their buildings, because you have to have everything approved and it has to meet a certain character and level of detail and expense. And I think we have to be very careful with that, because holy cow, the cost of materials on buildings is really expensive, and if you want to have things looking a certain way to match the uniform of what we did with our country downtown.
This was more to find out what past historical heritage marks were in our town. And it wasn't about restoring buildings or anything like that. It was about what made us up over the last 100 years, and it really had everything to do with the plaques that are on some of the houses in town. And once that was done, that was pretty much the end of it.
And I think it's great as long as we keep it to a municipal level, because if you have any kind of provincial designation and stuff like that, like even getting house insurance is difficult on houses.
I think this is more like looking at where the first airport was and stuff like that, and some of the pioneers in this community. I don't think it's got anything to do with restoring buildings or anything like that.
Well, I just think the museum's done a great job of providing us that information, and we should leave it with that. But that's my thought.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear as well. It's not like you're losing the ability to make these designations, should you so choose, at the council table. You don't have to have one of these committees or commissions in order to do that. And so if somebody says, hey, I really wanted to make my property a heritage property, that's still an option that's on the table to do. The problem, as you guys indicated, was that when it came from the committee, we really want to make your property a heritage property and formally designated, that's when things got hairy. So I think you guys are on the right track with this one. I do want you to know that you're not losing the ability to do this as a council, should somebody be interested.
Any other questions? Because we actually did pull this one off by bylaw, so. think it'll be a little silly to put it back on. So we can always revisit it. Same with the next one, Recreation Advisory Committee. Councilor Newman.
This one I spoke about a bit earlier. As it stands right this moment, I don't necessarily see the necessity of it set up the way it's listed here. Again, in my past experience is, and much like we said earlier with the commission, it has been a successful committee of council when it's, working with staff more or less, not necessarily the public. I'm a firm believer that committees do work when they're done properly, but I don't know that there's a desire at this point in time to get this up and running, but I do see this in the future becoming something that is hands-on with council and recreation staff or economic staff. However that looks, I don't know right this moment, but I do see there being a need for this.
And I don't doubt it, but right, again, I've had nobody say, hey, are you going to have a Recreation Advisory Committee? But again, it can be revisited. Any other comments? Councilor Egan.
Thank you. I sat on the Recreation Commission in Merritt for 3 terms in the 80s and in the 90s as well. And I just found that at that time, because there was one person in the Recreation Department, and that was Carol Susak. She was pretty much responsible for everything. And I think that our recreation superintendent and his staff are doing a really, really good job. And other than going around and helping them find things that are, working well or not working so well, and maybe talking to the community at large, I really don't think that there's much that this committee can do. So I'm in agreement not to have it.
Well, I sat on the Recreation Committee, and the only reason we had the Recreation Committee was to relocate the skate park. And that's what our job was for 4 years. And then it was almost a steering committee. Once it was done, we were gone. C.O. Smith?
Thank you, Your Worship. The one thing that I want to flag from this committee that I think is a small gap that can be addressed outside of this, so I'm not advocating for the committee, but you'll note that on the composition here, one of them is member of the board from School District 58. And I think that one of the things that we would stand to improve is our council to board relationship with School District 58, especially when it comes to recreational opportunities, because I do think that quite often, they've got land, we've got land. Sometimes it might make more sense to do a joint initiative on their land, a joint initiative on our land, whatever the case is. I think Vote Track is a good example of that. I think that even that project could stand for more discussion between the parties than has taken place so far. But you look at a lot of our different areas, the main park that's in Diamond Vale, because it's not City Park, is the CMS school site. Is there anything that we could do jointly to work together on that? And so I do not think this needs to be through a recreation committee. What I do think ought to happen is there needs to be some liaising between council and SD 58 on this particular item, because I think that you can make more happen by working together in this area.
Just to bring you up to date on that, this will be the 3rd time we've done this with School District 58, trying to get all of the areas used. This will be the 3rd crack at it now for me. So, and we also probably should consider NVIT, because they have their gym and their areas up there as well. So, yeah, this has been tried several times, and we'll see how that goes. Anyone else? I saw your finger twitching. Come on now. Okay. Let's move on. Youth Advisory Committee. And I think, yes, it's something we need. I think we need to hear what the youth in the community have to say. I haven't dragged my feet on this one. It's just that we're 6 weeks away from school ending. So this would be more of a September kick, I think. But I think it's needed. Will we get the youth to jump in? I don't know. That's the question. Councilor Hogan.
Well, I have a good feeling that we will get some youth interested in being part of this committee. I was delivering the youth entrepreneurship program, so it was a very well response program. My only comment about that is it says the one school district 58 trustee. I think that it's important to have the involvement of school district 58, either if it's a teacher, somebody in the administration, or anyone. It doesn't have to be necessarily the trustee.
Councilor Newman.
I agree that this is something that's probably community-wide needed. However, my experience in the past working with youth committees is that they are very hard to narrow down. And I say that only because they're very involved. Like we've got hockey practice tonight, we have baseball practice tomorrow, we have dancing tonight. They're a very busy group of individuals that often can't make our meeting schedules. So now looking at this at the reverse scope is, unfortunately my child is aged out of the school system, but I'm wondering if maybe the first way to look at this is if we get representation at one of the PACs in town at the schools. Like, I mean, it doesn't necessarily preclude us from being involved in their representation versus starting to build our own and then going from it that way. Sometimes it's us going to them. So, I mean, I did it in the past when my kid was in school. It's just, maybe we need to get representation in those schools.
CEO Smith?
I think that one thing that's really important to clarify on a youth advisory committee is the intended purpose. Because if your goal is to provide the kids a leadership experience and you look at this as an investment in them, I think this is a really good committee. It's a great structure, but that's the right way to frame this and think about this. If your goal is to get input from youth as to what's happening in the community, this is not the best structure to do that. In fact, I'd say it's the worst structure to do that. You'd be way better off setting up, hey, we're gonna have a group of teens, you can have coffee with a cop, really informal, like, hey, we encourage the youth to come out, or we're gonna go to you, we wanna hear from you, and we're gonna do it once a month, or set something up like that, where it's not a formal committee, but you're getting the ears, the voices of the youth. There's a way to do that outside the committee structure that I think would be far more valuable if what you're looking for is the youth perspective. But again, I do not want to minimize the structure, but understanding that it's labor intensive and this is really designed at providing them unique leadership experience. This is an investment from council into youth, not necessarily something where you're expecting to reap massive returns. Not saying that it can't lead to that, but that is how I think you would be best to frame this in terms of what you're wanting to see, and changing how you approach this based on what your desired outcome is.
No, I was in touch with Mr. Finch, who had me come in and speak to his Socials 11 class when I was campaigning, and he has a very astute crew who are all looking at some sort of a political life, and he's got a grade 12 group doing the same thing. He is really hoping we do move with this committee. There's also a deal, and I don't know if that's, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, CEO Smith, but we end up every year where we get an invite to send one or two students down to Victoria for like a mock session for 5 days. And I don't think we've ever taken a student down from here. I don't think that's happened.
It's not a standing invite. There are these opportunities for junior councils. Yeah, various communities have done that, but it's not an automatic standing invite for everybody who is part of it. You still have to apply for that, right. And that is something that has been done. And it's not just one conference either. I've seen youth at UBCM and other things, and so it could probably happen for SILGA and others. I think that if there's a desire to make that happen, it can happen. The other thing, of course, with this is it's a 1-year rotation, and so it's again, I just want to focus on this is about the kids, not about you if you run this committee.
Councilor Newman?
Just on that, like, I mean, again, the interest level lies, I think, in that of the children. And if you've spoken with teachers that have, keen political students that have an interest in politics, it would be, maybe it's our onus to just send a letter over to the high school saying, just a reminder, this is Tuesday nights when our council meetings are. Yes, they're online, but maybe you guys would like to be in the gallery here with us to see how it actually goes down in real life. And then the next thing would be, if this is an opportunity, I know through SILGA, and last year I'm pretty sure there was a representative from one of the school districts at UBCM. It's, there are opportunities out there, and maybe we need to remind the school board that, here are opportunities for our youth in case they do have these careers.
I've got one last point. This is the one where I would recommend making a bit of a change to the form if you do it. I think that the one change that I would make is have it where they're going to have a recommendation from a teacher or somebody within that accompanies the form. Not that people don't self-select out of this, but I think that it will help you in making sure that the people that are coming to your table are ones that are not just wanting to do it themselves, but they're getting a recommendation from a teacher. Hey, this is. They're invested. They want to be there doing it.
Right.
Just to point out, it also says that there's just 2 students from MSS, 1 student from NDIT, and 4 other members appointed at large, which could be anyone up to the age of 24.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's Councillor Etcher.
I think the youth committee is a great idea, and when we did try to start to have it, it was great. It was just, unfortunately, the pandemic started, and that scared everybody. So, there was great plans to have. I know one of the students that was in grade 12 at the time, had great plans, but so did the pandemic. So that kind of quashed that. So we never really got to kind of see what was going to come. Some of the students that were there were really eager. Some were very shy and barely said anything. So it's kind of unfortunate we didn't get to see where that would have gone because it didn't get far. But it'd be nice to see what could happen with that.
And that's, this committee can form as it moves along. So I have no problems with having it happen, and we'll see if it grows legs. If it does, if it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Pretty much every committee I've ever been on is either sustains itself or it doesn't. So I guess we're good with that. I guess, okay, so that's any other committees that anybody feels that we're missing? I think that's kind of a lot considering there's liaisons and there is a lot of time and that is already being asked by a lot of you. So with liaisons and committees and cows and meetings and Wendy off at UBCM today. Apparently I'm the only mayor in BC not there. That's okay. Wendy will do a better job than me. So, Councillor Newman.
Just looking at the policy for, just let me get, so council policy and council committee structure. I'm just curious, do we have specifications set out, and I've been quickly just trying to go through it, in regards to addresses or representation? Like I know, just with my history in committees, it's important that somebody is within the voting municipality versus in the outlying areas, or is that of concern to anybody? I know it has come up in the past in conversations while I was out on the campaign trail about, just people living outside the area, but I'm not saying that that's important to me, but I'm just wondering if that is something that has come up in the past.
Mr. Lewis, sorry.
Thank you, Worship. So this is in sections 5.1 and 5.2 of the policy that's as it's currently established, and bearing in mind a policy can always be changed by council. The current wording is, so membership will be diverse and broadly reflective of the community. The terms of reference for committees may identify specific desired experience, knowledge, expertise, and geographic location. And then 5.2 says preference will be given to City of Merritt residents to be appointed to committees unless explicitly identified otherwise in terms of reference. So at the moment there would be preference for Merritt residents but not a requirement. So if you wanted to toughen that up to either say Merritt residents only or loosen it out to get rid of that would be entirely up to council.
Councilor Newman?
No, I'm waiting for staff first.
I would just add as well that I'd be a bit hesitant to make it a requirement in circumstances where it's actually not a requirement of being on council. So you generally don't want to have any standard that's going to be completely different. So I really like the language. Take it for what it is, that all things held equal. Again, you're going to extend preference, but you're going to find it especially with the larger committees, the ECDEV committee of 13, you're going to have a business owner in Merritt that doesn't live in Merritt, and you're going to want them on that committee, and hard barring them is just not going to work well for you.
Well, also, if you are talking First Nations representation, most of them don't live in the same community.
Well, no, this is precisely why I bring up the question, is that perhaps then that to alleviate the discussion we were having earlier about having that First Nations representation on that maybe we include it in the wording in the policy somehow, because then that would be inclusive of that and meeting our mark off the top versus having it point blank in each one of our committees.
Yeah.
And sorry, it was not necessarily to exclude people on applying for committees. It was more on the inclusion side of things.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I think that, so first off, under the diversity section, I really do like the language of broadly reflective of the community, recognizing that 30% of our community is Indigenous inside the city of Merritt. That is even before you get outside the city of Merritt. And so I do think that there is an aspirational goal there, and there is a fairly clearly articulated preference for City of Merritt residents, but it certainly isn't barring it. And if we want to do it, I would do it probably at the terms of reference level, not at the committee level.
Councilor Newman?
Yeah, and just follow up to that, and I'm just wondering, because that would be through the reconciliation, if we put that in the policy itself, we would be covering our goals as a committee, as a community, or maybe we need to break down the word community so that we are clear in that sense. I'm just, the more and more, and I know Councillor Egan was on a call last week as well, it's trying to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible at the get-go versus necessarily in the terms of reference. So just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, the last bit, the council policy, council committee, any questions on what's laid out there? Anything missing? Anything you feel is missing? No? Okay. So
if you're concluding, Your Worship, I just think that one further resolution on that council direct staff to advertise for the following committees.
Yes.
And Greg, I'll ask you to tap me if I've got any of this wrong, but it's Age-Friendly and Accessibility Advisory Committee, Airport Advisory Committee. We are holding off on environment because of a separate resolution there, Economic Development, and Youth Advisory Committee, those 5. Is that correct? That's everybody's understanding?
That's everybody's understanding.
Okay. So that council is directing us to advertise for those 5.
5, sorry. Yeah. Age-Friendly, Airport, ECDEV, CYP.
Youth Advisory.
Yeah, sorry, that's Youth Advisory. The last one, that's 4.
That's still 4. Age-Friendly, Airport, ECDEV, Youth Advisory.
Yeah, and then you got 1 in the wings, so that would be 5.
John gives up on counting. That's the name of this story.
I totally agree with your list.
That was so bad.
So that's the recommendation. That's the recommendation we'll make?
Your words.
So that's the recommendation we'll make?
Yes. Sorry, you moved that?
Well, nobody's moved it yet.
I will move that we go ahead and advertise for said committees, 4 committees.
Councillor Etchart, seconds. Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you for reminding me of that, everyone. Motion terminate the meeting. Thank you. Terminated. Shut your